that needs no introduction. Stuart Wheeler, most of you will be aware, is usually a member of the audience at our Bruges Group meetings, and he's a great friend and supporter of the Bruges Group. And I think in difficult times, there is no better supporter than Stuart Wheeler that one can have. In recent years, Stuart has been a highly effective campaign against the Lisbon Treaty, taking the government to court for breaching its manifesto commitment to hold a referendum. We are grateful to you, Stuart, for the time and resources that you devoted. In his earlier life, Stuart has been a soldier, a barrister, a merchant banker, and founded IG Index. I think his primary motivation in founding IG Index was to give people the opportunity to take a position in gold, because central bankers and governments are particularly keen to prevent their citizens taking any position that is contrary to their own fiat currencies. Unfortunately, Gordon Brown didn't take advantage of the services of IG Index when he decided to sell all of our gold reserves at, I think, around $250 to the ounce. If he'd hedged his bet and taken a long in gold, he could have had a bank account, a personal bank account, that's even bigger than Tony Blair's. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we often have people that describe themselves as compassionate, caring conservatives. We seem to have an awful lot of them. But when it comes down to it, they seem to be people that want their fellow citizens to pay higher taxes so that we can maintain a bloated welfare state. Now, Stuart Wheeler, I think, is a supporter of free market economics. He's not one that wants to see higher taxes and a big state. But he's certainly a man of great compassion. Those of you that may read the Rich List will know that a few years ago he featured in that top 1,000 wealthy people in this country, but he figures no more. It's not because he's returned to IG Index as a client. It's because he's actually given away most of his wealth for good causes that will help his fellow man. And that's what I call compassionate conservatism. In January, I wrote an article when Mr. Cameron brought Ken Clarke back into the shadow cabinet, and I said at the time that the only good, no good will come of this, because it's going to even further dilute the Conservative Party's commitment to have a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. And I close by saying the only people that are going to benefit from this move are UKIP. Well, I'm afraid in this case Stuart's proved me right. Stuart has worked and worked over the years to try and get some clarity from the Conservative Party and its leadership as to what exactly its commitment for a referendum means in practice, whether it's a here today, gone tomorrow commitment. And I'm afraid that all of Stuart's hard work and commitment hasn't resulted in a clear position, and hence he finds himself having to vote for UKIP in the European elections, although I believe he is truly a very fine conservative. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we have an opportunity to hear from a man of great integrity who has never sought any personal political advantage for political activity, unlike so many other people that are engaged in politics today, and a man whose only objective is to serve his country and to serve his fellow countrymen and to try and bring independence back to the United Kingdom. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Stuart Wheeler.
Well, Thank you very much for that. I hardly recognized myself when he was talking. Perhaps I should point out that I'm not a member of any political party. I shall start by saying a bit about why our current relationship with the EU is most unsatisfactory. But I'm going to say rather more about what we need to do about it. The UK needs to trade with the whole of the rest of the world. Even if the EU were a flourishing organisation, it would be a mistake to allow it to get in the way of our ability to trade elsewhere. In fact, however, the EU is far from a flourishing organisation. Its share of world output in 1980 was 26%. It's forecast that the share in 2015 will be just 17%, a staggering drop. Now, partly this is not its own fault. The number of workers available to meet the needs of those who, because of their age, can no longer work, goes down and down and down among the members of the EU, whereas in the United States, India, and perhaps China, it's the other way around. Partly, however, it's very much the EU's fault. Its interminable regulations and restrictions on what businesses can do, and its rules intended to protect the employment of individuals, but in fact having the opposite effect, contribute very much to the EU's decline. Then there's the common fisheries policy, which the Norwegians were sensible enough to reject in 1973, even though their rejection meant they couldn't join what we then called the common market. That common fisheries policy has virtually wrecked this country's once great fishing industry. The common agricultural policy, which makes our food much more expensive, protects mainly French farmers at the expense of our taxpayers, and often makes it impossible for developing countries to sell their cheap food to us. We're threatened with the danger of a European army. Now, whatever one thinks of the rights and wrongs of the invasion of Iraq, one thing became very clear at that time. There is no way we shall ever get agreement among the 27 member states on any kind of military action. Again, we're losing more and more of our vetoes. And taking energy as an example, we can very easily find ourselves obliged to share the oil we produce with our European neighbours. But the most crucial thing is the appalling cost of our membership. We're all, I think, rightly concerned, very concerned, that the UK is going to have to borrow £175 billion this year and almost as much next. But that borrowing will not go on forever. What will, unless we do something about it, go on forever is the inexorable and gigantic cost of our EU membership. If we accept the figures of the taxpayers' allowance, the cost is about £120 billion a year, i.e. about 2/3 of that horrifying figure that we have to borrow. So the idea that Europe is boring and irrelevant and that the recession is so important that we should forget about Europe is just ridiculous. It is, to a large extent, the cost of being in Europe that is putting this country in the difficulty it is in. Although I certainly do not exempt from blame the bankers or the Labour Party. Let us look at the figure of £120 billion in another way. What it amounts to is £2,000 per person per year. Now, think of a family of 4 with perhaps only one breadwinner. Such a family has, on average, an income after tax of about £17,000. And with 4 people in it, at £2,000 each, it is being made worse off by about £8,000, and its income is £17,000. And indeed, to take another point, on the EU's own figures, the advantages we get from the internal market are only about 40% of what we pay in order to get those advantages. I hope I've said enough, though I might have said quite a lot more, to make the case that things need to change. The crucial question for this country is what is to be done about the EU. And since the Tories are likely to be the next government, and indeed I hope they will be, the question becomes, what can be done to get the Tories to do the right thing? Normally, as they've made very clear, they do not like banging on about Europe. They have, however, noticed that we are to have Euro elections on the 4th of June. So on the 11th of April, the Daily Telegraph carried an interview with William Hague. Nothing could have illustrated better why I shall vote UKIP in the Euro elections. There was in that interview absolutely no commitment to anything. Let's look at it. If there is a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty, will Ken Clarke vote against it? William Hague says that he expects, mark you, that he will. What kind of language is that? Why doesn't William Hague know how Clarke will vote? Did he and David Cameron not ask him that simple and obvious question before they appointed him to the shadow cabinet? Ken Clarke himself was quite specific on the subject. As a backbencher, calls for a referendum were absurd. Take another point. The Conservatives should make it absolutely clear that if elected, they will immediately call a referendum on Lisbon. But what did we find in that interview? I know it's different now, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But William Hague indicated that the Conservatives were likely to attempt to scrap the treaty, possibly by calling a retrospective referendum. Heavens above, these are weasel words gone mad. The Tories want to sound tough on Europe without making any commitment they think they can avoid. The leadership is terrified that a tough stance will split the party. But who will be on the Europhile side of that split? There are the two big beasts, Clarke and Heseltine, and one or two smaller beasts. The party has shown, quite rightly, that it's not afraid of big donors by expelling me. It should not be afraid of big beasts either. By the way, it is only the leadership that is so timid. A backbench Tory MP came up to me not so long ago and begged me to go on doing what I was doing. 80% of our members, he said, are behind you. And the polls are perfectly clear about the voters. The voters were recently asked by the pollsters YouGov which of 10 things they would most like to see done. And I really do think the answers were extraordinarily significant. Top, reduce immigration. Second, reduce the powers of the EU and increase the powers of Britain's Parliament. Way down were things which you might easily have expected to be at the top. Reduce taxes, deal with climate change, scrap ID cards. We might agree with all of those, but the the voters thought they came beneath reducing the powers of the EU and increasing the powers of the British Parliament. So fortunately, it has finally become clear to David and William, at long last, that the voters do care about Europe a lot, and that they want clear commitments, not a cowardly collection of weasel words. As we have all been told, a week is a long time in politics, and that Telegraph article was nearly 3 weeks ago. Yesterday, it was the turn of the Times to have an interview, or to have interviewed William Hague, and lo and behold, we read that he promised immediate legislation to reject the treaty if it had not yet been ratified by the whole of the EU. It's not hard to work out what caused this wonderful conversion. The 4th of June was looming. The campaign for the Euro elections was just beginning, or about to begin, and the lessons from the polls were sinking in. Alas, however, it is hard to get rid of bad habits. The commitment to a referendum if Lisbon was not law was fine. But what about the more likely situation that Lisbon is already law when they get in? Back we go, I am sorry to say, sad to tell you, to the weasel words. William Hague left open the door to the possibility of the Tories promising a referendum in their general election manifesto, even if the treaty had been ratified by all. Well, leaving open a possibility is not reassuring. And given the fact that it is 3.5 years since David Cameron promised to leave the EPP, a pledge he restated immediately after his election as leader, one wonders how long that possibility to which the door has been left open would come to be considered. Let's face it, the Tories have not the slightest intention of calling a retrospective referendum on Lisbon. They simply hope that the weasel words they have used will sound tough, so that they may not lose too many votes on the 4th of June. Those who think, like I believe most of us here this evening think, must strive mightily to get such a big UKIP vote that the Tories realise they have to guarantee us that referendum, irrespective of whether Lisbon is law or not, when and if they get in. People have asked me, since my donation to UKIP, why I did not stay within the Conservative Party and use, as they put it, my influence. At one time, I did have some sort of influence. I might almost say I was subjected to a charm offensive. Would I like to have lunch with Shadow Minister X? Would I pop in for a discussion with Shadow Minister Y? Would I like to see William Hague to discuss Europe? The reason, of course, had nothing whatever to do with the merits of my views. It was to make me unlikely to say something which would be awkward for the Conservative Party, or, God forbid, to support UKIP. I cannot resist one final point about that Daily Telegraph interview. William Hague asked for a protest vote. Well, voting Tory would not be a protest. They're miles ahead in the polls. He must have meant UKIP. Obviously, he too will soon be expelled. Well, welcome to the club, William. Well, I've had a bit of a go at the Tories. So let me make it quite clear, first, that I'm not at all bitter about their decision to expel me, which was very understandable, and secondly, that I definitely do hope that they will win the general election. It is, however, entirely in their hands whether they get the support of people like me. All they have to do to benefit both the country and themselves is to give that guarantee of a referendum on at least the Lisbon Treaty, and they will, in my confident opinion, win the general election in a trot.
Thank you very much indeed for that very clear speech and statement, Stuart. I'd now like to welcome Fraser Nelson. He's been described as the fastest rising star in right-wing journalism. He graduated from Glasgow University. He's worked for the Sunday Telegraph. He was then recruited by Andrew Neil to join the Scotsman. And following the purchase of The Spectator by the Barclay brothers, he became their associate editor, and he is now their political editor, as well as writing a weekly column for the News of the World. He has a reputation as being a journalist that's quite keen on facts and statistics, unlike many in his profession. He's also a supporter of free market economics and the smaller state, and he's been a rational critic of conservative economic policy and its current lack of substance. Ladies and gentlemen, Fraser Nelson.
Great. Thanks very much for that, and thank you, Stuart. It's great, listening to it. I work in the world of Westminster, and the great thing about the News of the World column is that these are the people who decide British elections, and they are more Eurosceptic than us in this room. It's strange, there is a mismatch in British politics between the British public opinion and the Westminster consensus, and the public opinion is brought to the door of Westminster by, well, I would say mavericks like Stuart Wheeler, but he is not a maverick. He is straight from the mainstream of what they think in the real world. And the great thing about him giving his donation to UKIP is that it places at the back of the minds of the Conservative leadership, if we don't watch it, we're going to lose all our votes to UKIP, or a substantial chunk of them. So it is possible to be a loyal Conservative and to wish UKIP well, because as James Goldsmith absolutely worked out, there has to be an electoral price to pay if you slip too much into the Westminster stream. Those dynamics are very important. Now, what I figured I would speak to you tonight about is the Conservatives and Europe, what their thinking is at the moment, how it's changing and how it's likely to end up. David Cameron's main wish for Europe, I suspect, is that it would just go away, that nobody would ever mention it again. Is not because you have to remember that Cameron, of course, is the victor in the Tory modernising project, and the modernisers are primarily defined against their enemy in the so-called, right wing of the party. And Cameron always likes to say that he moved the Conservatives into the mainstream. At which point, I'd love to remind him that the Conservatives got more votes than Labour in England at the last election, and if all those guys were on the fringe, then what does that make the rest of society? Of course, Europe is hugely a matter of national importance, yet the Conservatives are still in therapy about this as a party, because they're still scarred by the internal battles. The great thing, though, is that events of the last 10 years have really proved the Eurosceptics right. It's a brave man who would sit here and think that Britain would be better prepared for the recession if we didn't have a floating currency that could have collapsed so spectacularly and seen our exports fall only 10%. It's devastating, of course, but it's not the 20-30% fall of exports that Germany is suffering. It's not what Ireland is suffering. It's not what Spain is suffering. The only good thing about this recession is that we have a floating currency right now. Of course, it didn't make things cheaper like that. All the arguments that were at one point hypothetical before the introduction of the euro have been borne out to be true. There is now no argument that the euro promotes trade, makes things cheaper, or makes countries better able to respond to shocks. So you would think there shouldn't be that much of an argument within the Conservative Party. As Stuart says, where is this pro-euro wing? And I can understand it for people like Ken Clarke. I say, when he was young, there was this idea that Europe might end the prospect of war between the continents. It was, of course, a huge issue for guys of a certain generation. But the good news is that if you meet the new MPs, I've met quite a lot of them, and they've got a picture of Thatcher on the wall and of Jacques Delors on the dartboard, really. These guys are as sceptical, Eurosceptical as you can get, they're as pro-Thatcher as you can get. And when we get 140 new MPs, new Tory MPs into Parliament, then you really will struggle to be able to fit the pro-Euro wing of the party in a London black cap. I mean, it is going to be substantially change the shift of focus, but not right now. We've got Conservatives who are still, when they mention Europe, they think William Hague gets flashbacks of his Save the Pound campaign in 2001, and they all get memories of what used to be. They don't think about it rationally in terms of what the public want, they think about it in terms of positioning the party and presenting it as not banging on about Europe. Now, the EPP, of course, the Conservatives will withdraw from the EPP. This was a pledge David Cameron made to steal Liam Fox's thunder in the leadership campaign. And it's, William Hague is saying he's supremely confident they'll get enough members to form a group. There's no doubt it's a headache for them. They probably won't get the numbers that they might do, but it's going to look embarrassing. But who really cares? My News of the World readers really could not care less about what group the Conservative MEP sitting in the European Parliament. And this is what they are more concerned about, is why their bins aren't being emptied once a week like they used to be, and the answer to that is the EU landfill directive. It's strange how so many of the arguments that really genuinely irritates my News of the World readers day to day have their roots back in the EU. Lisbon, the treaty, is right enough fading from the memory. There was a polling presentation recently that Cameron gave to his party where they did that poll, I'm sure you've seen it, when you ask people what their number one concern is. And not many guys say the European Union, because the competition is quite stark. You've got crime, you've got immigration, you've got the economy. You really have to get down to a small number of probably people in this room and blood relatives before you get to people saying that Europe is actually a bigger problem than all of these things. But crucially, this doesn't mean they're not concerned about Europe. It just means it's not their number one concern. And these polls of priorities are very, very deceptive, because they don't show, of course, when you ask the British public what they think about Europe, as Eurostat, as the European Commission does regularly, we are the most resolutely and defiantly Eurosceptic member in the Union. The opinion polls haven't shifted on that. And when you put to the public, to my News of the World readers, what they think about the Lisbon Treaty or any treaty that sounds vaguely European, they don't like it and they don't trust it. It's their country and they don't want to see any more sovereignty given away. But this isn't always apparent from the polls which the Conservatives see internally. So again, you've got this mismatch between what rocks the public's boat and what rocks the boats in Westminster. But we are approaching European elections, and the rhetoric is shifting. You can see, William Hague's formulation was that he was always asked, well, what would you do if Ireland votes yes? Because Britain's yes, let's not forget, was pushed through by a Labour majority, was signed by the Queen, and is literally lying in a vault in Rome now. I love that detail. They have to fly it over to Rome so you can't tear it up. It's difficult for the Conservatives because what do you do? There are some Eurosceptics who believe the Lisbon Treaty would basically take our relations of Europe to such an intolerable degree that it would force renegotiation because everything that would stem from it would be so palpably unacceptable to the public. But there is no doubt that this is a very difficult question. We all depend on our Irish brethren, really, to say to their government, what part of no don't you understand? And I've actually got quite a lot of confidence in the Irish. Sure, they're in a recession now, but they'll be thinking to themselves, well, if we had a floating currency, maybe our exports might be lifted, maybe things wouldn't be quite so bad for us, and they're right. I don't really think that the Irish are going to be bullied or stressed into voting yes a second time, although it has to be said, a lot depends upon it. It's, anyway, all we can do is pray and hope that, when we gave Ireland their independence, they might return the favour and vote no a second time to us, and this time around. But there is no doubt that the Tory language is shifting, and they want to hint they're squaring up to Europe again. And let there be no doubt, they are doing so because of UKIP and the threat of UKIP. 5 years ago, we had Robert Kilroy-Silk, who was a kind of strange phenomenon, a maverick. There is such discontent with all of our political parties. And again, the main political affiliation of my News of the World readers, I do talk about them a lot because they are, they represent the public far more than, I hate to say, my dearly beloved Spectator readers who are pretty much sold in all of this. But when they think about this, again, they're emphatically against it, but they would probably vote for UKIP because they want a protest vote. They don't believe that the man with the blue rosette is going to serve them any better than the man with the red rosette. In fact, their problem is the man with the rosette, in fact, of any colour. They dislike politicians as a class, and that is, you can see this in the reaction to the expenses fiasco. The reason they don't want them taking any money is because the opinion, the stature of which politicians generally are regarded by the public has fallen so much, they can't see why they should fork out for an 88 pence bath plug or anything that Jackie Smith's husband might be getting up to. And it is, but there is an anti-politics vibe out there which UKIP could harness if it catches the wind. But there is no doubt that without a populist figure like Robert Kilroy-Silk, UKIP will struggle to push one of the mainstream parties into fourth place. It is Labour's nightmare that Labour finishes fourth in the EU elections. It may well do. We'll see. Though personally, I doubt it. Of course, we do have Libertas as well, with Linton Crosby behind them, who might split the UKIP vote. So I think UKIP's showing in this election will, to a large extent, inform the Conservatives as to how Eurosceptic they have to be. If UKIP don't do very well, I don't think they will turn up the rhetoric. So what Stuart's doing certainly is arguing the Eurosceptic side of the corner and holding their feet to the fire. But quite a lot depends on the rest of it. Now, when you look at the Conservative Party policies, they say, for example, the odds are that the Conservatives will pull out of the EU army. This is something which Liam Fox wants to do, and to send the money to a hospital to treat mentally traumatized servicemen instead. It makes a great deal of sense. But the EU army isn't the problem. The problem is I'll give you an example. One of David Cameron's policies is to reduce the rate of VAT on small businesses, to give them a VAT holiday. Now, it's strange that they don't instinctively know, as people of another generation would know, the VAT is an EU tax introduced to us by Brussels under very strict regulations laid down by a directive which was renewed only 2 or 3 years ago. It is not ours to change. We don't have the power to do this, and yet the Conservatives genuinely don't seem to realise. I mean, Nigel Lawson stood up in the House of Lords and said to them, don't you realise you can't play about with this? There is no methods. It's not our tax. But you forget. I mean, this is in a way, it's great to have a Conservative Party led by younger, dynamic men, but the problem is if you don't remember the battles of the 1970s, you're condemned to repeat the errors and to get into the mistakes. Now, if you ever think Cameron wants to have abolished school expulsion tribunals, I mean, it's a great idea if a school wants to abolish, if school wants to expel a chap and, the parents can argue in a tribunal and reverse the decision of the school. It's not very satisfactory. But if you talk to any of the many European lawyers around this country, they will tell you that that any attempt to abolish a school tribunal would be kicked out by Strasbourg immediately because it violates the human right to a fair trial. These things have got their tentacles our law in more ways we begin to realise, because this Labour government has done such a fantastic job of concealing it, of disguising as British regulation that's foisted on us by Brussels. So it's not just the public, but many of the guys who are about to govern this country don't realise what is within their power and what isn't. Now, if David Cameron doesn't confront Europe, he will very quickly find the limits of his power, the extent to which the hands of a British Prime Minister are now tied by Brussels. And everything from giving anonymous evidence in the murder trial. I mean, Jack Straw says he wants a review of this, not realising again that this is a Strasbourg thing. I mean, Europe has done very, very well in keeping up the illusion that we are far more self-governing than we are. I mean, opposite the House of Parliament, there's this big building called the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. But the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom isn't in London, it's in Strasbourg, and the Conservatives will find that very, very quickly when they get into government and try to do everything from VAT changes to school expulsion tribunals to all these things, and then we'll find that they can't because we signed away that sovereignty some time ago. So what tools are there to the Conservatives? They will have the treaty, absolutely. On that side of the argument, they are... they will side the referendum, if Ireland hasn't signed up to it. If Ireland has, then we'll see. I mean, there are people in this room far more qualified to lay out the options that a government does have, if given that our yes is locked up in a safe in Rome. One option is to take a kind of muscular Chirac approach to the EU, basically telling it to go to hell. And now, it's because we have got a kind of common law approach here, unlike the Roman law in Europe, we tend to gold plate rather than to confront EU regulations. A good example of this is the age discrimination legislation directive brought in a couple of years ago. Ireland didn't apply this to its pensions industry because, of course, it would create merry hell. I mean, you charge somebody a pension depending on how quickly he's likely to die. You know? It's basic, but we did apply it to our pensions industry, and it caused havoc. We had the option not to, but our civil service is programmed to take everything that came out of Brussels and to make it even stronger than it already is. It is tempting for the Conservatives to think, well, we're basically going to say, as Chirac did, we're going to defy you, and if you don't like it, we'll see you in court in 5 or 6 years' time. But it's very difficult to do that in Britain because it's not just the guys at the government, it's the whole system which is geared up towards giving Brussels that little bit of extra power. I mean, we for a while had a whole department committed to deregulation that couldn't deregulate because 80% of the regulations come from Brussels. And there are so many things that you just can't do. And it's, however, I believe there will be a crunch point in this for many reasons. For the same reason that Cameron doesn't want to fight the 50p tax, he doesn't want to fight in Europe because his key message is we've changed. Now, if I was his pollster, I would, probably tell him this was the great way to maximise the results. But the Conservatives are at a juncture now. Our economy needs saving, not just managing, as we saw from that historically tragic budget 2 weeks ago. So the choice they face now is, do you want a large majority or do you want a large mandate? Because to rescue this country in the way that Thatcher did in 1979, it is not enough to go with the flow in Europe. It is necessary, as it was necessary with Thatcher, to fight hard and to fight in every way you can, because we will need every tool at our disposal to recover the economy from the almighty mess which Labour has left it. And it's not just the tax rates, we need to deregulate as well. And the re-regulation of our economy in the last 12 years, most of it coming from Brussels, is one of the great tragedies. If Brussels can, it will absolutely get its claws into the city. And Gordon Brown, for all his boundless evil, was quite good at fighting Brussels off when it wanted to regulate, because Brown realised the city, while it lasted, was a great milk cow for him. It was his great paymaster, and the more Brussels regulated, the less money Gordon Brown would get. He fought a pretty good fight, on the city at least, but it was an exhausting one. And you need to do it in every single level. If the Conservatives choose not to fight, then Brussels will see this kind of power or attention vacuum and go in there. I am hoping that the Irish will save us. I'm pretty optimistic that they do. But if they don't, then Cameron will have to face some bitter truths. Truth number one is that the Bill of Rights is not worth the paper it's written on as long as it is inferior to Strasbourg. A simple piece of legislation in there, as we found with the Metric Martyrs case. Parliament is sovereign. The Bill of Rights can be the defining judgment of our legal system in England. All you've got to do is make it so. But Dominic Grieve disagrees. I mean, he is a kind of human rights lawyer himself, or his wife is, or one of the two. But he is one of these conservatives who doesn't. He thinks that it would send a terrible sign, and I've had this argument with him myself, over a terrible sign to other aspirant EU entrants if Britain were to scrap the ECHR on the grounds that it's playing havoc with our law. Upon which the ECHR is opposed by, 70–80% of the British public. And they do have to choose. Who do you listen to? Is it more important to encourage aspirant nations to join the EU, or to do what the overwhelming majority of British public opinion tells you to? There are hard choices. You can't duck them, and if you do, you will end up with far fewer of the tools which you need. I think the Conservatives are a bit like, as Churchill said to the Americans, they will do the right thing in the end after exhausting all other available options. And so we will, I think, get there, because you can't delay this fight. The stakes are too high, the damage is being done. Only 4 days ago, we had some EU health commissioner instructing us not to fly to America because of the flu jabs. I mean, given how much more vaccine they've got over there, you'd be far safer in America than you would in Europe. But the encroachment is going very quickly. It will have to be faced down at some point. I can imagine Cameron doesn't want to do it now, but he will have to do it later. And I hope, Stuart, all power to you in pursuing this side of the argument, because the voice of the overwhelming majority does need to be heard in that small, tiny village called Westminster. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Fraser. Now we have an opportunity to ask questions, and I see there's quite a lot of you. Have we got a microphone at the back? You've got the microphone there, that's great. First of all, the gentleman with the white beard in the centre there, please.
I'd like to suggest it's grey, not white. Given what's been said, I mean, would we want a Conservative government that doesn't understand their relationship with the EU? I mean, I think it's absolutely pathetic that, there they are, one of the governments, and they don't even understand the limits of the EU. I mean, it's just absolute nonsense.
Stuart, would you like to start off by answering that question? Because I think you said you would actually like a Conservative government with all its faults. Yes, and the question we've just had.
You have in mind. If it's not going to be a Conservative government, it's going to be a Labour government, I think, or unless it's an amalgamation with the Lib Dems. But I would much prefer a Conservative government, because although I don't think they're nearly Eurosceptic enough, at least the leadership isn't at the moment, they are still more Eurosceptic than Labour. Apart from having other advantages. I think even without Europe, or especially without Europe, Conservatives have significant advantages over Labour. You can say, yes, I would like a Conservative government. We're not going to have a UKIP government.
Can I just put a small supplementary to you, Stuart? In which ways do you feel a Conservative government would be more Eurosceptical than a Labour government?
Well, I mean, just to take one very simple example, they would grant us a referendum over the Lisbon Treaty, at least if it's not yet law, whereas Labour have made it quite clear that they would not. And the Lib Dems, although they're fascinated, also would not. So I think in many respects they are more Eurosceptic, though, to repeat myself, they're not nearly Eurosceptic enough.
Thank you. Fraser, any comment on this one?
Yeah, it is, I admit, rather tempting to despair of the Conservatives. I move, it's like supporting Millwall, it's a very difficult relationship with people getting it wrong. But I would say this about David Cameron: his great attribute is that he learns very quickly. He is not wedded to past mistakes. You get some politicians who box themselves into a corner and spend the next 4 to 5 years trying to justify a wrong decision they made. Cameron is very adaptable, and right now they're overwhelmingly focused on winning the next election. As you can imagine, a party that got crushed for 3 elections in a row would be. It's understandable. Now, I would like to hear them talk a lot more about what they're going to do for the government. But my answer to you is this: what should be of the Open Conservatives? Because they will, I really genuinely believe that Cameron will learn quickly and will adapt. He's very fleet of foot, and his instincts are broadly in the right place. And once he has finally won this election, he will be able to purge himself of all these ghosts which are still left over from the civil war which the Tories spent much of the last 2 decades fighting.
Just following up on that one, Fraser, I get the impression that Cameron's actually very accommodating, consensual sort of guy, and that's what Europe's all about, to actually stand out against Europe and to stand up in the European Commission and say we're going to do something different. Needs a leader of tremendous personality and strength of will. And I think many of us have not yet seen that from David Cameron.
He said, what was the nation said just the other day, we're absolutely behind being in the centre of Europe. So that worries me quite honestly.
Well, when British politicians say they want to be in the centre of Europe, they always have got this daydream about shaping the whole continent around their own image, and this is the great trap. Almost all 27 members think they're going to make it work their way. But I think in answer to your question, Luke, can you see David Cameron, plonking his headband down and saying, "We want our money back"? I can't imagine it myself. But the main you see, the way the Nice Treaty has gone and the way that the QMB has started, there is the potential, even if he did, to stand up there, he would just get outvoted now. The battles you have against Europe will, I think, mainly be done in having a referendum and stopping Lisbon go through, he will do that, and in stopping the government cede any more power than it has to, because it's a constant battle, batting back these directives year after year after year. And I think when he realises how much his hands are tied, and it will be a shock to him, I think he really will step up a gear.
Thank you. Yes, gentleman with the glasses and the blue tie.
I keep reading in the press that UKIP's organisation has collapsed, it's a wasted vote, that the BNP's on the way up. Is this wishful thinking, the politics of fear, or is it true? I mean, what exactly is the score on this?
Stuart, I think you went to the UKIP conference a few weeks ago. What impression did you get?
I didn't fully get that question.
Well, the question was about UKIP, whether their organisation is failing, whether they're on the defensive to the BNP, and they're not going to be the force they were at the last European elections.
I think that conference, I wasn't able to be at all of it, but it was extremely well organised. I was surprised, it was just as well organised as one of the major party conferences, in my opinion. So I don't think there's any problem there. You mentioned the BNP. I think that there is a threat from the BNP because people who find that foreign workers have taken away their jobs may be inclined to sort of go the whole hog, as they would see it, and be racist and vote BNP. I certainly hope not. UKIP is not racist.
Fraser, any views on the state of UKIP's organisation?
Yeah, sure.
And whether the BNP are a threat? Do you think the BNP are going to win seats?
Every year, journalists like myself get very worried about the BNP resurgence. Every year we're proved wrong. But I wouldn't, we are pretty unique in Europe in having mass immigration, but no far-right party in the political debate. Now, I think with Europe, people, to answer your question, sir, people compare it against 5 years ago, where we had Robert Kilwell, who really was a phenomenon. He was a populist, and if he had not just, self-destructed, he really could have gone on, I think, to have given, because so much nowadays depends on the telegenicity of a leader, and Kilroy was an incredibly telegenic guy who did provide a protest vote for the great lump of people who basically, the plague in all your houses party. There is a great, normally the Liberal Democrats would get that vote. You could do a European elections. The BNP, I think there is a real threat about it. And again, I refer to my News of the World readers here because they're the ones targeted. Where they're strong are in Labour, what I call Labour-rotting boroughs, where these constituents haven't seen a politician bother to ask for their vote for ages because Labour take these places for granted. When the BNP turn up, they're often the first politician these guys have ever seen saying, look, we care about you, what are you worried about? And I've met quite a few BNP voters, and I wouldn't say I've met a single one who's racist. It's just a cry for help. It's throwing stones at government's window because, you know, immigration is a huge issue in this country and nobody in Westminster dares to talk about it. So I would think there's a difference, a huge difference between the racist element of the BNP leadership and its support. As to whether it will make a breakthrough, you do think if they do it now, when will they ever? We've got massive unemployment, plus we've got massive immigration, immigrants are still coming in, people can see this in their communities, all the conditions are there for a far-right resurgence in Britain. I think this is held back only by our status as the most tolerant country in Europe. So we'll have to see how these two factors play against each other.
Gentleman in the pink shirt in the second row.
I'm a conservative. I have been all my life. I'm so depressed now. From Enoch Powell onwards, we've had the Conservative Party saying they're going to do this and that. He was a traitor, the fishing rights were given away. It's gone on and on and on. 85% of our legislation now comes from Brussels. And to bring it up to date, my own local member said on the European elections, don't talk about Europe. I mean, it's absolutely absurd, the biggest national thing we have. And you really despair. I didn't want to do I'm a Conservative councillor. I really don't know what to do myself. I feel very inclined to join Stuart, but you've got the UKIP, you've got this, what do we call it, Veritas. They're going to split the vote with the BNP. And I'm afraid, you know, I'm a bit despairing about it, I really am. The only Conservatives are the only people. I often wonder, maybe it's just not politics, there's something behind this which is stopping the Conservatives and everybody else getting out of Europe. I think there's something more sinister behind it.
Thank you very much indeed for those comments. The young lady on the front row.
Hi, I'm Alison Squirrel. I'm an MEP candidate for the Conservatives for my sins, so I came here to find out what the opinions are. How much of Europe do you think we can unpick? And I'm thinking of the human rights, and I'm also thinking of the common fisheries policy. It's an idea that I actually really should say, is to opt out of things like the common fisheries policy because we can say it's an environmental disaster, because it's depleting fish stocks. And that plays well with the vote blue, go green. Do you think that there's any way that you can get out of these things and stitch them once you're...
Stuart, do you think there's any chance of an opt-out from the common fisheries policy?
I don't think that. I mean, the history, of course, is that just when we were trying to join what we thought was the common market, this thing was cobbled together in a great hurry because we could be blackmailed into agreeing to it. There's been no sign really of opt-outs of something like that which benefits the other members and is to our disbenefit, or whatever the word is. So I'm afraid not. I mean, in the end, the only threat we have is to withdraw from the whole thing. And I don't think that would suit the EU, and therefore, if it gets to that, they might begin to be, if they threaten it, they might begin to be more accommodating. But in fact, Margaret Thatcher, I'm told, never actually, when she was shaking her handbag and all that, she never actually threatened to leave the EU. You don't go into a negotiation with your ultimate thing immediately produced, but it has to be there in the background, I believe.
Fraser.
Why can't we just withdraw from some of these treaties? I mean, everyone says you cannot do it, you cannot do it, you cannot do it. I mean, both of you are Eurosceptic and Susan say you can't do it. Why not? Henry VIII did it with the road.
Fraser.
Why not?
Fraser Nelson, do you think it's practical politics to try and just get out of parts of the treaties, or is it feasible to negotiate opt-outs?
I think what the lady did, she was right, she didn't threaten to leave, but she did threaten to stop paying them the money, and she went as far as to order the Treasury to stop it, and when they got word that the mechanics were in place to stop giving them all this money, then they caved. So you do have to be as much of a man as Margaret Thatcher was to do this. You do have to play hardball with them. Now, you must have got two things. ECHR, we instantly, we can, and withdraw from ECHR simply by declaring our Bill of Rights to be superior to supplant that? Yeah, we can, because as now you will get, now of course there are people in the Shadow Cabinet who say legally you can't. We're bound by it. You've got to be, it's the condition of being a member of the Council of Europe, and being a Council of Europe is the condition of being in the EU. It's not, but if Lisbon would be passed, it would be, but we're still a window. But we do, as the Metric Martyrs judgment established a very important principle that Parliament is sovereign, even now, even after Nice and Rome, etc., we still can declare our own Bill of Rights to be senior. I'm hoping to persuade David Cameron that this should be done, because he thinks legally it can't be done. So we're in the Spectator, we're going to quote various lawyers persuading him that it can be. Because Dominic Green and his cabal of pro-EU lawyers is claiming that it can't. Right, and as the fisheries policy, yeah, sure. We should basically, the environmental angle is a great one, but then the extent of bullying comes in, if you do this, this is a hostile act, how would it go over? I just hope that David Cameron doesn't have the delusion, the Blair delusion, that he's going to lead Europe. Because when you do, then you start to compromise and give away parts of our sovereignty as part of your great grand plan. I hope David Cameron just thinks, I'm in it for my country here. I don't want to bend the whole of Europe to my way. Now Blair was kind of, Blair, even now, he wants to come back and be the president of Europe. And have all it's a horrible thought. Imagine him going off to the White House and Mrs. Blair being the first lady and all of that stuff. It doesn't bear thinking about. But I hope that Cameron, and I'm actually quite confident, as he would with those delusions of grandeur, and without them, you can play hardball as Thatcher once did.
So you're confident he doesn't have those?
I'm confident he doesn't have those, yes.
Lady on the gangway in red.
Lindsay Jenkins. Just a point of information. Mrs. Thatcher did actually have a bill drafted at the time, but she had it was just 2 paragraphs to withdraw from the European Union or the EEC. And we all learned that in the Bruges Group, actually, from Enoch Powell, who gave a speech.
Thank you for that point of information. Gentleman on the second row, blue shirt.
A year ago, Jim Fitzpatrick announced that daytime running lights would add 5% to fuel costs. I wrote to him pointing out that this was self-evident nonsense, and after 3 days he confirmed a typing error. It should have been 0.5%. A year before that, I proved Stephen Ladyman wrong by a factor of 50. He had claimed that speed cameras are 12% more cost-effective than flashing signs. They're actually 50 times less cost-effective. In my extended correspondence with the BFT and safety camera partnerships, I have come across more blatant incompetence, more lies, more dishonesty, and more skullduggery than I had ever imagined possible in a banana republic. Or with any luck, the coming global warming may turn us into a real banana republic. My question is simply this. I think we all agree that this country is doomed unless we get out of the EU. Does anybody else believe, as I increasingly do, that even after we've got out of the EU, we are still doomed because our education system has collapsed over the last 2 generations to such an extent that we've nobody left who's competent enough or honest enough to run it?
Fraser, do you think our education system is to blame? David Cameron went to Eton, he had a very fine education. George Osborne went to St Paul's and he went to Oxford, he had a very fine education. Doesn't it seem to be more than education that's causing a problem in this country?
Oh yeah, I would argue so, and I don't think, well, are you American now?
Canadian British.
Canadian British. Well, there you go. See, we are hiring in people to come and run our politics for us. I think it's just a problem of big government, really. And those of us who think it's going to get a lot better under the Conservatives will be in for a shock. Not because the Conservatives are venal or useless. It's just because the government has got its own kind of momentum. And what you're talking about, sir, I imagine that the ministers you mentioned wouldn't have had the faintest idea of any of this. They probably didn't approve it. It would have been some bureaucratic error which the machine mass produces as it does. Yeah, probably. The thing is, they were probably given wrong information because they probably didn't look very far in the first place. But that is simply a defect of big government. It's funny, I mean, in Britain we don't do government very well. So some other countries do. I mean, Scandinavia does it pretty well. You know, we don't. So I think we should stick to what we're good at, which is free enterprise, and cut down on what we're bad at, which is government.
Yes, the gentleman in the corner.
It strikes me that the problem about the EU is that to make a decision is a very unusual, in that you've either got to be in it or out. There is only two positions, and that's a very unusual thing in politics. I can't actually think of anything, possibly for a long time, where there's been this particular binary type of decision. And the public space is occupied by an awful lot of people who call themselves Eurosceptics. Now, either you leave the EU, once you say, I'm not leaving the EU, you are immediately involved in all this consensus reform. We want this reform, well, this common fisheries policy, and maybe we want something about the European Court of Justice or whatever it is. You can only actually, and that is, I think, one great difficulty in getting politicians to move on this. The politicians are used to moving sideways, crowd. That's what happened with Mrs. Thatcher. She gradually got more and more people to support the free market revolution.
Thank you very much indeed. Stuart, I just wondered if you could give your view on that. Do you think we have to leave the EU to solve this problem, or do you think in some way we can negotiate vast areas of EU law and EU regulation, exempt ourselves and get to the sort of relationship we want by remaining a member of the EU?
I think we could. The Chief d'Estaing came to an event at the Telegraph and Global Vision, and he more or less offered it. Not that he's the president anymore, but he did say, you know, the UK has a problem and we should be prepared to accommodate them. So I realise I'm in a minority in this room in thinking that it's not essential to leave the EU. I think we could have a very, very different relationship with them, which involved cooperation over the things we wanted to cooperate with, and not being involved certainly in any further integration, and probably also we could get out of a lot of the things which we're already restricted by. So I don't think, nevertheless, I think if we go into such a negotiation, in the end we may have to use the nuclear thing and come out, but I think it's possible that we could avoid that.
Thank you. Next question, the lady on the gangway. Yes, just there.
Caroline Stafford. Doesn't Stuart Wheeler feel encouraged by the activities of Dan Hannan as a Conservative? And it's very noticeable that Eurosceptics have led the list of Conservative candidates for the European elections. And the gentleman who mentioned that he was a councillor, may I say that one reason the Conservatives are saying little for the Euro elections is that all legislation has to come from the Commission. There isn't a government in Europe. And that it's terrible that we've got an unelected Commission. But please, Stuart Wheeler, would you tell us what you think about Dan Hannan?
What I think about Dan Hannan, I'm a huge admirer of Dan Hannan. There's been about 2 or 3 million hits of the magnificent speech he made in the EU about a month ago when Gordon Brown was there. And incidentally, I know Kilroy Silk was wonderful, but so is Nigel Farage. Speeches, Daniel Hannan's. Dan also has managed to get away, I think, with being an outer. I mean, he is in favour of coming out of Europe. Nevertheless, because he was such a good speaker, he got 10 minutes at the Conservative conference the other day. I don't know if anyone's watched that. It was a very interesting speech, very effective, but he was very careful not to make any commitments about supporting the EU or anything like that.
Thank you very much. Gentleman on the front row. Yes. Yes, you, sir. Yes, absolutely.
Gentlemen, you both have dealings with the man. Mr. Cameron has a very touching faith in focus Group data discussions. Having taken part myself in many a focus group discussion, it isn't exactly the totally objective, honest thing that it's made out to be, and yet he seems to have this terribly touching faith in it. How can he be weaned away from this as a PR man?
Fraser.
Listen, I think it's pretty much impossible to wean not just David Cameron but any modern political party leader away from these tools of public opinion. Partly because they are becoming incredibly accurate now. I mean, YouGov is almost taking the fun away out of polling data because it's predicted the last kind of three elections so incredibly well.
But focus groups. Opposed to YouGov.
Focus groups rather than opinion polls.
Well, the thing is, of course, the focus groups, what they don't show is how it is possible to lead opinion and change people's minds. Now, I think David Cameron is actually quite keen to say something unpopular that later on becomes popular. I mean, you can tell because he's now claiming that he was against spending cuts, way back in the day. As he puts it, it's great, it's in his speech in Chelmsford, if anybody listens to it, he was saying, we were opposing spending cuts way back in 2008. And he did, what he meant was November. That was when he came out against spending cuts. But he likes the idea, obviously, of having been, the outrider against a certain idea. So I think it does attract him. It's just that you get this safety valve kicking up saying, no, the opinion polls don't like it, and no, Andrew Cooper from Populist says it's a very bad move. Again, it's difficult, and again, understandable for a party that got gulped 3 times so hugely, because a lot of the modernisers think they lost because they tried to operate outside the bandwidth of popular opinion, and they want to now operate inside it. This is an article of faith for them that I don't think they're going to change, really. But I think you can be encouraged when I think the situation is so desperate in this country that the conventional wisdom won't do because it's taking us to the edge of oblivion. So David Cameron will either, in government, he's got 2 choices. Either he's going to be a radical or he's going to be a failure, and I think he realises that.
I think David Cameron goes too far in listening to oppose and so forth. I think a politician who had strong views on what should be done and what was right for the country, and persistently put those views forward, even if in some cases the population didn't agree with him, would hit a good note for people to say he really means what he says, I'm going to vote for him. I think we should do more of that.
Gentleman on the back row there with the glasses.
I was a member of the Prime Minister's Policy Unit from 86 until 90. My name is George Guys, if you can remember the days when Britain had a government. Now, there is a solution, and the solution, I think, is being pioneered by the Swiss. The Swiss have got 2 bilaterals with Europe, in which they gain all the benefits of trade, but without much of the political baggage. There's some political baggage, but very, very little. Now, the way we can negotiate ourselves, if only the Conservative Party would accept it, into the Swiss position, would be to continue vetoing everything, good, bad, and indifferent, within the EU, until the rest of them agree that we could renegotiate ourselves back to what the Swiss position is. Now, if the answer that people would come up with to that is that Switzerland is a tiddly push country that has no standing in the world, this is absolute nonsense. The Swiss have got the best of everything, and I think we should aim for it ourselves. But try and talk to William Hague or anyone about that, and they just get it done.
Fraser. Fraser Nelson, do you think it's realistic politics for a Cameron government to be vetoing everything and saying we want the Swiss model? Can you see that scenario happening at all?
I can't, no, and I can see it. I mean, as a free marketeer, I can see the attractions between a sort of relationship that Norway and Switzerland have with the EU, free trade, except under the government. But again, look at the parameters of public opinion. Basically, about 30% are outers in this country, which is, about versus 1% in Parliament, but it's still it's a minority position. And I still think that the majority of the public, as well as the politicians, will agree with Stuart in thinking that we can find the accommodation we like within the union if we can just persuade them that his standing is right and that we do have a problem and it needs to be addressed. Look, I think you were asking, of course I think Britain can survive and thrive outside the EU, I absolutely believe that. But on a practical basis, I can't see a political mechanism to take us from here to there.
Any comment on that one, Stuart? Do you favour the Swiss model?
Possibly without leaving the EU, I haven't really thought it through, but the Swiss arrangement is very good. Fraser mentioned Switzerland and Norway. If you exclude the tiny Luxembourg, those two countries have the highest highest production per capita of any country in Europe. They have a higher GDP per capita than 26 of the 27 members of the EU, Luxembourg being the only exception. And I think we should have a free trade arrangement with the EU, and possibly we could get that without leaving it. I don't know. It's a wonderful system, this question.
Thank you very much, Stuart. I've got a question from the gentleman in the back with the white shirt and the blue tie.
I think I can manage without a mic.
Good.
I feel a little nervous because I'm quite a long way from the door. John Flack, Conservative European Parliamentary candidate. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Can I urge everyone, before you abandon the Conservative Party, to look closely at the cusp candidate in each region? Because I'm the cusp candidate in Eastern. I can think of colleagues like JP Fleureau, the cusp candidate in London, with respect, and Alison here, and others like me throughout the country who would stand shoulder to shoulder with Dan Hannan, and I think gain the approval of many, many people in this room. So look, please, at the cusp candidate who might lose out if too many people vote any other way than Conservative. The final point, if I may, Barry. There's a consensus here that we want a Conservative government. It's got to be better than Gordon Brown. Yeah. A vote for any party other than the Conservatives on June the 4th is effectively a vote for Gordon Brown. Do not give something to the enemy.
Thank you for that piece of publicity. Yes, gentleman with the glasses.
I'm sorry to interrupt the gentleman who just spoke, because I'm the cusp candidate for UKIP in Eastern Counties. Slightly more next time in, I'm sorry sir, you won't be, but maybe if we both do well, we can displace the Liberal Democrat and the Labour, and we'll have 4 Tory and 3 UKIP. What better than that? I have got a question, actually, and to paraphrase what Stuart said, he seemed to be suggesting that Tories are being evasive. That's how I concluded what he was saying. Fraser was saying that Conservatives are frightened of a split. That might not be true. That seems to dominate their thinking. But why don't we just accept what Conservatives have said over the years about the EU as being truth for a change? David Cameron has recently said that he profoundly believes in Britain being in the EU. Now, I joined the Conservative Party 45 years ago when Francis Pym was my local MP, and he assured me that the Conservative Party would mould the EEC as it then was in the image of the United Kingdom. That's what he said repeatedly. Now, if he believed that, then it was the biggest failure of political policy that there has ever been. If he didn't believe it, he was a liar, and I won't accuse him of that because he's now not here to defend himself. Conservatives over the years have repeatedly said they will change this, that, or something else. The CAP and lots of other things. They have not done it. Why should we believe that Cameron will do it this time?
Stuart.
Well, I'm afraid my opinion is on Europe. The only relevance to Cameron, quite honestly, is what will or won't win him the general election. I think that's his only consideration, and I don't think the Conservative Party has a policy of what to do when they come into power as far as Europe is concerned. They just wish it would go away, as I think Fraser said, and they don't want to talk about it. And when they come to power, as I certainly hope they will, unfortunately, they won't get that right. I think they'll say, well, look, we've got this dreadful financial situation, and we've got health, and we've got this, and we've got the other. Europe will wait till the next Parliament. That's what I'm very frightened about. Unless, and this is why you should vote UKIP, I think, unless we can get an absolute commitment that they will have a referendum on Lisbon, even if it's already law, then the referendum will be, do the British people accept Lisbon? And when they get a resounding no, then David Cameron will have a huge mandate to go back and be really tough in negotiations.
Any word of comfort for these CUS candidates, Fraser?
I hope you all win. Can I just, I've moved here to say something unpopular, but David Cameron, you said he's profoundly pleased to be an EU member. Well, the majority of the British public are also pleased to be an EU member, and I would.
I'll give you a chance in a moment. Let's just let Fraser answer this.
No, we're not talking about do you want to be in the EU or not. The majority of the public want to be in the EU. And that is
I think the vote has demonstrated that.
Okay, maybe there is a majority for Okay, listen, I'll keep talking then. I will give you three reasons why I personally am pleased that Britain's a member of the EU. Right? Yeah, I told you it's going to be unpopular, but think of all the... Right. A, I'm married to an EU immigrant. It's great that she can come over here very easily. Right. B, it is great that the EU means that Gordon Brown won't be able to impose capital controls and try to keep our money in here when the country goes to pot. Also, the EU has just imposed competition on the health service, and we will be able to now take our vouchers and go over. There are good things to the EU, and we will not...
Let's just listen to Fraser's point.
There are good points to the EU, and to make the case, of Eurosceptic case strongly, I think it's important to admit it. There are reasons why people are pleased to be in the EU, and hang me on one of them.
Apart from that, Mrs. Lakewood, enjoy the opera.
Thank you very much, Atco. Next question. Have I got a question over there? No? Okay, I'll take the gentleman in the glasses on the second row.
That's me. Thank you.
That's you.
Michael Park from Chelmsford. One, we've absolutely forgotten today the fantastic might of the Euro machine and the fantastic amount of money they can spend at any one time. And positive, according to their point of view, for being in Europe, and then the negative point of view, oh, well, if you're out of this thing, where the hell are you going to go now? And they'll also put in this one at the same time, well, we've got you through the sterling crisis, haven't we? And they've got millions to spend on this, and we haven't got millions to spend on the anti-campaign, which we know is the really right thing to do.
Thank you very much for those comments. Gentleman at the back, blue suit, bluish shirt. Yes, you, sir. Yes.
Excuse me, Fraser Nelson, what do you think the result will be of the second Irish referendum?
Oh, I think that Irish referendum will vote no, because I can't see any real reason to change their minds. Rationally, economically, the EU doesn't propose anything where they got rich, not because of EU subsidies, because they have the lowest corporation tax in the Union. And I don't think that any greater conformity with the EU would be in their interests. I just think all they wish for now is a floating exchange rate. So I really can't see any advertising mechanism that would really rule over their eyes, even in the economic distress we're in now.
Okay, gentleman by the window.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask the speakers what they think the big challenges are for the Conservative Party in the future. If you think that Europe are probably going to forget about structural change for some time because of the problems with the Lisbon Treaty, and that common defence and foreign policy has really just run into the ground over the years, and we're just not going to join the euro. What are the big issues in the next 10 years which really are going to challenge the Conservatives?
Is this a general policy question or just about...
Yeah, just their thoughts on the future.
Fraser, would you just like to give your views on that?
I'll do it quickly. One, trying to persuade the IMF not to come and take us over. Though I suspect that they will probably fail in that, because even if Cameron reduces spending by 3% every year, which would be implied in the budget, that would still not, I think, close our deficit when the bull run in gilts ends, as it will, when the growth recovers. There's not going to be all this money bailing us out, and I think that there'll be a crisis. Trying to stave off that crisis will be his number one priority, and trying to blame it on Gordon Brown if it happens will be his second priority.
Just on that question of the not being able to finance our deficit, why, Fraser, do you think this is such a big problem? When Harold Macmillan said our people have never had it so good, debt to GDP of the country is about 125%. Italy has had a debt to GDP ratio well over 100% for many years, and the Italians have kept going with their lifestyle. Why do you think it is going to be impossible to sell UK sovereign debt?
Well, one must distinguish between debt and the deficit. So, I mean, Britain was still paying off the debt of fighting the Second World War at that point. And it's funny that Churchill had to borrow 60 billion pounds in today's money from the Americans, and this year Gordon Brown's going to borrow 175 billion just to plug the gap between what his government spends and what he collects in tax. But to answer why I think it will be difficult is because right now, we can more or less get away with borrowing this incredible amount. I think it's this year 240 billion we're issuing in gilts. But we will have difficulty in a year's time or 2 years' time when the global growth is recovered, when the Asian stock markets pick up, and the global risk aversion will stop, and money will start to go after the more risky securities and away from the gilts. And I think then that the British government, whether it be run by the Conservatives or Labour, that there's no realistic way of balancing this budget. Why would the Chinese and the Arabs be so stupid as to keep lending us money when we've got no repayment plan? And there will be such competition for debt, primarily led by Barack Obama in America, that I think that we've already had a couple of failed gilt auctions, and I think that's a sign of the stress which will certainly only increase as this crisis deepens.
Stuart?
I think that's very pessimistic. I've been listening to Tim Congdon and Patrick Minford, both of whom think that the policy of quantitative easing and throwing money is absolutely right. Tim Congdon, who's got a very good record, expects to recover to begin at the end of this year, and really that could lead to the problems Fraser's mentioned. But I think actually things move so quickly now that things will pick up in 2010. Firms will begin to make profits, and they'll be taxed on their profits, and it won't be so bad after all, frankly.
Okay, question from the gentleman in the blue shirt.
Just a point initially, I think there's an overwhelming majority of the British people that do not only want a referendum, but also vote no in such a referendum. I think there was
You mean in a referendum?
So I think they did, in fact I think the Bruges Group reported on it, there was a series of referendums around the country, and something like 89% wanted a referendum, and something like 80% would actually vote no in such a referendum. Even the BBC, who are known to be Europhile, claim that 55% of the British people want to get out of the EU, and you can usually, and that's given this the BBC. But the point I'm trying to make is that I think all the way through, the EU has been looked upon as a sort of a semi-free trade association. In fact, it's actually a customs union, and that's the nub of it. And a customs union inevitably moves towards federation as night follows day. And my question is, when are the Conservatives going to be truthful about the EU, given the fact that they got us into this mess in the first place in 1975?
Stuart, it's a customs union. We see the EU putting up barriers to third world produce and all this sort of thing.
Well, they do that, exactly. I don't think we should. It would be much better if we had a free trade association. At the moment, because it's a customs union, we can't do bilateral deals with America, China, India, etc. And also, we have to put up with the fact that developing countries can't export here without us charging them a tariff. It would be very, very much better if we did have a free trade association. I agree with that.
Fraser, have we got completely the wrong structure there? Should we not have a customs union but a free trade area?
Well, I always think that Britain should have what Britain voted for in 1975, which was a free trade area, and all the political growth since then has got no democratic mandate, and this is why the government still lives in fear of a referendum. And you know, it was one thing I've taken away from tonight is that I need to update myself on public opinion as to whether we want to be around union. I promise you that.
Okay, well, I think that's a wonderful point at which to finish. We've had a very full discussion. We've had a lot of questions. And I like you, am very, very grateful to our speakers. I think we've had... We've had a tremendous contribution from both of our speakers. They've not ducked any of the issues, and they've gone right across the waterfront on this, and they've done their very best to answer all of your questions. And I'm very grateful they've both come here tonight, and I'm sure you are, and I'm sure you'll want to show your appreciation. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, you'll be very interested to hear that we've got our next meeting on the 20th of May, and it's about immigration. Immigration and the European Union, which many of you have referred to tonight. The speaker will be Sir Andrew Green, Chairman of Immigration Watch. And at the meeting, he is going to be launching his paper on the issue of immigration and the European Union. And we will also have Edward Lee MP, who is chairman of the Public Accounts Committee in the House of Commons, to speak, who is also very concerned about this issue. I look forward to seeing you on the 20th of May. Thank you. And the 20th of May.